I was never the type to seek revenge. In fact, growing up, my father often told me, "Son, a man who lets bitterness into his heart loses the power to control his own life." And for most of my years, I believed that, until the day life threw me into a corner, forcing me to rethink everything I thought I knew about fairness, about justice, and yes, about revenge. They say life is all about the choices we make, and I guess in a way, that's true. But sometimes life makes choices for us. Sometimes we're just forced into situations where we have no say. At least that's what I thought when it all began. I was just a regular guy, working a regular 9 to 5 in a small office in the middle of London. Nothing extraordinary about my life, nothing that would make you stop and notice. But there was one person in that office who had a way of making my life extraordinary in all the wrong ways. Jared. Jared was that guy who never seemed to do much, but always managed to take credit for everything, always finding ways to push his own work onto others, while somehow walking away scot-free. I was one of those others. He'd shuffle around his responsibilities and somehow I'd end up doing them. At first I let it slide. After all, what's the harm in doing a little extra for the team, right? But over time it wore on me. It started to feel like more than just a bad habit. It became a pattern, one that turned my good nature into a weapon of exploitation. I became resentful, but never spoke up. I just kept working, kept pretending it didn't bother me, kept letting Jared take the glory. Then one day, Jared did something that would be the catalyst for everything. We were working on a big project, one that could change the direction of our careers. I put in my best work. I stayed late, sacrificed my weekends. I even missed a few birthdays and holidays, all for the project. And when the presentation came, Jared was the one standing there, taking the credit for it all. You see, he didn't just take the credit. He actively lied to our boss, telling him that I wasn't pulling my weight, that I was slowing things down. It was the last straw. That betrayal hit harder than any punch. So I decided something. I wouldn't be the nice guy anymore. I wouldn't just sit back and let this happen. I would take control. I would make him feel the way I had felt all these years. I knew this wouldn't be easy. There's a kind of silent code in every workplace, isn't there? That idea that no matter how much you've been wronged, you never cross that line, never rock the boat. And for a long time, I respected that. But when he threw me under the bus, that line didn't just blur, it shattered. The revenge wasn't going to be swift or dramatic. It wasn't about confronting him directly. No, that wouldn't be enough. I didn't want him to feel the sting of words. I wanted him to feel the consequences of his own arrogance. I began with small things at first, a quiet word in the right ear, a suggestion, a hint. I planted seeds in subtle conversations, giving the impression that Jared wasn't the best for the job, that his performance wasn't exactly up to par. These things, tiny and almost invisible, began to shift the perceptions of those around him. He wasn't the confident, untouchable golden boy anymore. Slowly but surely, his reputation started to tarnish. But I wasn't finished. The real lesson, the real payback, wasn't in ruining his reputation or making him look bad. It was in watching him destroy himself. You see, the thing about people like Jared is that they can only stand on others for so long before they collapse under the weight of their own false superiority. As Jared's actions came to light, I was a mere bystander, an observer of his unraveling. He had no idea what was coming. He continued his manipulations, trying to twist everything to his advantage. But the cracks were starting to show. His confidence was no longer convincing. And eventually it got the attention of the higher-ups, who were starting to question everything he'd done. It was a slow burn. At first it felt like nothing was happening. I almost questioned if I'd made the right choice, but I kept reminding myself that justice doesn't always come in the form we expect. Sometimes it's quiet, hidden beneath the surface, until one day it all erupts. Then it happened. One morning, Jared walked into the office to a storm waiting for him. The project he'd taken credit for was suddenly under scrutiny. The figures didn't add up. The clients were unhappy with the results, and when they looked back at the reports, they found mistakes. Mistakes that I had caught, but that Jared had deliberately overlooked. Jared was cornered. He tried to play the same game, deflect, make excuses, but the walls were closing in. His lies were no longer convincing. It wasn't just the boss who knew, but everyone. The people he had manipulated, the people he had taken advantage of, they were no longer silent. And that was the moment I knew, deep down, that my revenge had been served. He lost his position. The very thing he'd fought so hard to hold on to slipped away. No longer the golden boy, no longer the one with all the answers. He had no one to blame but himself. And as I watched him pack up his things, I felt no joy, no sense of victory. Because in truth, revenge doesn't heal the pain. It simply makes the other person pay. The damage was done, but I had learned something along the way. I had learned that justice doesn't always come quickly, but it does come. That patience, even in the face of frustration, is a strength. I also learned this. Revenge is only worth it if it serves something greater than our own ego. It's not about making someone else suffer for the wrongs they've done to us. It's about protecting our own peace, our own dignity. It's about not letting the actions of others define who we are. In the end, I realized that the greatest revenge I could have ever taken was not destroying him. It was moving forward, unaffected by his deceit, knowing that I had the strength to walk away with my integrity intact. And now every time I face a difficult situation, every time someone tries to take advantage of me or belittle me, I remember that no one has the power to take away my peace unless I allow them to. That's the true lesson in all of this. We have the power to control how we respond to the world around us, no matter how unfair it may seem. So if you're ever in a situation like this, where you feel wronged, betrayed, or taken advantage of, remember, your response is what defines you. Don't let anger or resentment cloud your judgment. Take the high road. Let time be your ally, and when justice comes, you'll be ready to embrace it, not with bitterness, but with understanding. As I sit back now and reflect on the way things unfolded, I realize how easy it is to get caught up in the idea of revenge. At the time, it felt like justice, like making things right. But looking back, I see that my actions weren't driven by righteousness alone. There was bitterness in them, a desire to see Jared face the consequences of his wrongs, and to see him suffer just as I had. But I've come to understand that bitterness, in any form, is a poison that ultimately harms us more than it harms the person we're angry with. The truth is, I didn't need to see him suffer to feel better about myself. I didn't need to tear him down to prove my worth. In fact, when I looked into his eyes as he packed his things, all I saw was a man who had lost everything. Not just his job, but his self-respect. And it wasn't because of me. It was because of the choices he had made long before I ever decided to act. That's the thing about life. It has a way of catching up to people. Our actions, our choices, always come full circle, even if it takes time. And while I had been so focused on the idea of revenge, I had missed the most important lesson. It's not about what happens to others. It's about what happens to us when we hold on to anger. I remember speaking to my dad after it all went down. I told him about Jared, about how I had taken matters into my own hands, how I had made him feel the sting of his betrayal. And my father, as calm as ever, just looked at me and said, "You've done what you needed to do, son. But remember, the best way to punish a man like Jared isn't by bringing him down. It's by rising higher than he ever could." At first, I didn't get it. How could I rise above someone who had wronged me so deeply? How could I let go of the resentment that burned within me? But as I sat with that thought, something started to shift. I realized that the act of letting go, the act of rising above, wasn't for him. It was for me. Letting go of resentment, of anger, of the desire to see someone else suffer isn't just an act of forgiveness. It's an act of liberation. The weight I had carried for so long, the weight of injustice, the weight of betrayal, was lifted the moment I chose to let go of it. I was no longer bound by Jared's actions. I was no longer giving him power over my peace. I think that's why people get so obsessed with revenge in the first place. We think that by making someone else pay for their wrongs, we can reclaim our power. But in reality, all we're doing is giving them more control over us. We become obsessed with their actions, with their consequences, and in doing so, we lose sight of our own growth. As the weeks passed and I began to focus on my own career, my own goals, I found that the more I invested in myself, the less I cared about what happened to Jared. He had been a chapter in my life, a painful, frustrating chapter. But he wasn't the whole story. And the more I let go of him, the more room I created for the things that truly mattered, for the things that brought me peace, for the things that would help me rise higher. The workplace wasn't the same without Jared. His absence left a space, and for the first time in a long time, I could breathe. No more manipulation, no more underhanded tactics. It wasn't a perfect world, but it was better. And then one day I received a call from my boss, the very man who had once believed Jared's lies about me. He asked me to come in for a meeting. I had no idea what it was about, but I went anyway. When I walked into his office, he handed me a new project, a bigger project, one that would elevate my position within the company, one that would give me the recognition I had long deserved but never sought. He said, "I've been watching you, and I can see the potential. It's time you were given the recognition you've earned." In that moment, everything clicked. I hadn't needed to tear Jared down to rise. I had only needed to remain true to myself, to my work, to my integrity. I had let go of the bitterness, and in doing so, I had allowed myself to rise higher than I ever thought possible. And now, as I look back, I see the full picture. Jared's downfall wasn't my doing. He had set his own fate into motion long before I ever thought of revenge. His lies, his manipulation, his deceit, they were his own. And just like everything else in life, they came back to him in the end. The greatest revenge I ever took wasn't about making him suffer. It was about choosing to rise above it all, about choosing to be the better man, even when the world told me I was justified in being angry. I didn't need to stoop to his level. I didn't need to break him to feel whole again. I just needed to stay true to who I was and let time do the rest. So if you ever find yourself in a situation where you feel wronged, where you feel betrayed or taken advantage of, remember, revenge won't give you peace. Rising above, letting go, focusing on your own growth, that's where true justice lies. And as I close this chapter, I encourage you to do the same. Don't let others' actions define who you are. Let your actions define you. Keep moving forward, keep growing, and let the world see you rise higher than anyone thought possible. If you found this story meaningful, if you believe in the power of letting go and rising above, make sure to like this video and subscribe to The Modern Stoic. Remember, your peace is your power. Stay grounded, stay wise.